I want to bring in Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. In addition to being on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, he served in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, you bet.
As always, first of all, there's no debate. Soleimani was a bad guy, had innocent blood on his hands. I do want to talk about the intelligence, though. Soleimani planning to target 4 U.S. embassies is a very specific claim. When you were briefed last week, do you remember that being mentioned?
No, they didn't go into a ton of specifics on where, but there were very specific things about dates. And it seems that my friends have forgotten that when they came out. That when I came out, I said that was actually about as detailed as I've heard in any briefing before, because usually we learn absolutely nothing in the large briefings with 400-some people. And there were specific dates. They were put out by a person in that room. I won't go into more detail. And that was extremely specific. And by the way, those dates were very near term. Now, if you don't believe the intelligence, you being generically to anybody that doesn't believe the intelligence, you have to think that General Miley was lying because he had said he'd read the report 25 times and was convinced. You have to believe that Gina Haspel, a career CIA, now the director of the CIA, was lying. Same with Mike Pompeo and everybody else up there. Now, you can believe that. It's a legitimate viewpoint. I happen to believe that they were telling the truth.
Well, just to defend skeptics, because that is what I do professionally, I mean, we have heard before from different CIA directors, secretaries of defense, secretaries of state, different claims about intelligence that ultimately proved to be false. I think
Sure.
I think after years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's healthy for people to question this kind of thing, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree, except that, when we're talking about a full massive invasion and everything, that's one thing. When we're talking about the fact that a guy that everybody knows was bad, everybody sees a history of 20 years. They see a history of 20 years of escalating attacks. They saw what happened in the last week that both targeted Americans, targeted an embassy, and then we see that the man was actually in Iraq. What was he in Iraq for? He wasn't there to make peace. Trust me, he was there to coordinate again. It's not a huge leap to then understand that there may be reason to believe that there were attacks on the horizon. Imminent, it depends how you define imminent. Maybe that's in a day, maybe it's in a week. But we know his history and we know his future. Unless he, somehow found a different religion and all of a sudden wants to make peace with everything, then I think it's easy to look at that and say we know what he was going to do.
I asked Secretary of Defense Esper yesterday whether there was specific intelligence that, as President Trump claimed, the Iranians were plotting to target 4 U.S. embassies. Take a listen to part of his response.
What the president said with regard to the 4 embassies is what I believe as well. He said he believed that they could have been targeting the embassies in the region.
Are you uncomfortable at all with the president talking about his general beliefs as opposed to what the intelligence and evidence states?
50-50. So, the president has a right to declassify whatever he wants. I like when stuff, that can actually be potentially harmful is not put out. And I think he's done a good job of not putting that stuff out. But I also think that the one criticism I'll give to the White House in all this is after this happened, there should have been a better communications plan out of the White House. I think an Oval Office address, I think a statement from the press secretary right when this happened would have set the table where we wanted to go. That didn't happen. And we ended up learning a lot more on Twitter, which Twitter can serve a purpose, but in that case, not really. And so, look, but I think getting into the minutia of this is, I think, exactly, frankly, what my good friends on the other side of the aisle want to do, because the reality, this was a good move. It's hard to defend and say that Soleimani shouldn't have been attacked, because if you think about all the Americans that have died, all the attacks that have had, all the people that have died, look in Syria and elsewhere, we didn't target 200 Iranian military that just wanted a paycheck for retaliation. We actually targeted the man that did it. And then, by the way, Iran escalated. They expected a response, which is why all their air defense systems were up, which is why they shot down an airplane. And once again, Donald Trump didn't respond.
President Trump said today it doesn't matter whether or not the attack the attack by Soleimani was imminent, because Soleimani had this horrible past. I agree with you. He had a horrible. I agree with the president, and I agree with you. He had a horrible past. He did a lot of horrible things, not just to American soldiers, by the way, but to the Iraqi people, the Iranian people, people in Syria, people in Lebanon. But does it not matter? It does matter whether or not it was imminent. That's how they're justifying the strike, and that's how they're justifying not bringing you guys in Congress into it all.
Well, look, I think if it's First off, on the congressional piece, this idea that they needed to come to Congress and get permission to strike Soleimani, I disagree. We can't debate on the floor of the House of Representatives whether we're going to strike somebody, because at what point does that threshold stop? Is it any time a weapon is released against a terrorist, we have to debate it on the floor?
No, but you can loop in the
know.
Gang of 8.
Yeah, so I have no problem with that afterwards, right? And even if it's prior, that's fine. And I think they should have done that, as I've said from the beginning. But what we're missing here is the fact that this guy was the mastermind, and this was a proportional response to take out the guy responsible. And what do we see as a result? I had a lot of friends out here that were saying this was the beginning of World War III. We saw Iran do a face-saving response. We saw an actual failed response at what they thought was air defense, which tragically took 170 lives. And we see today that it didn't unite the Iranian street, like some of my friends said out here. You actually have people on the Iranian street right now angry at their government, and I hope people are watching that.
Yeah, well, we're certainly bringing that to them and showing it to them. And I hope that you're right that that's it. But the Iranians have a way of waiting a month and then doing something that can't be tied to them.
And they've done that. They've done that for 20 years, and this is the first time we've ever struck back at them.
Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you so much for your time. As always, appreciate it.
Yep.
Nancy